Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to our first session of the day. This is an intimate conversation, and we're really happy that you're here to be a part of it. So I'm Churchill, Possip's Director of Community and the moderator today. And you have joined our keynote session with some remarkable educators and speakers. This is Leaders Who Listen, Creating Openness in Education. We want to open with a moment of gratitude. This is a big day for us. We love having our partner retreat. It happens once a year, and there are sessions throughout the day that people will be joining. It's our third annual partner retreat, and this whole day is going to be filled with great conversations with Possip partners and team members. So whether you're just joining us for this session or for all of them, we're really excited to have you. And this day is built to help you be successful, inspired, and connected with others in your work. Just a brief moment to share what's in store for today. We have 4 sessions happening throughout the day. In the session that you're in now, we're going to learn 6 principles that help open schools, allowing schools to co-create with families and communities. At 12:15, we'll kick off with handling hard feedback. This is a conversation with school leaders about how sometimes feedback is hard, even when you're practicing principles of being open. So we're going to learn tactics for handling hard feedback. We'll talk at 1:30 about confidently sharing your data and insights. Our dream team from Possip, Jennifer and Jasmine, will teach a process for identifying the stories you want to tell and the data that helps with that. And then we'll close out the day talking about communication strategies that meet families' needs. So a deep dive into the communication data that Possip has, bringing it full circle, talking about what opportunities it allows for co-creation with families. So thank you so much for joining, and we hope to see you throughout the day. We're going to go ahead and get started. So today we have a great conversation. First, Possip's CEO is going to talk with our honored guest, Dr. Landon Mascareñaz. He is the author of the forthcoming book, The Open System, Redesigning Education and Reigniting Democracy. They're going to talk about principles that help open systems and why designing alongside community matters. And then we're joined by standout leaders who I'll introduce each of them a little bit later today, from Houston ISD, Sumner County Schools in Tennessee, and KIPP Jacksonville in Florida. They'll share reflections and experiences and note their experiences based on the conversation Shani and Landon had. So we're really excited about that. Before we kick off into that first conversation, let's get on the same page about what open systems work is. So Landon's smiling. I see him smiling in the background because I'm about to tell you guys about the things he's very intimately familiar with and will give us more information on. What are the principles that govern open system work? We see these elements in every project and every strategy that we encounter throughout the day. And it's also really noticeable when these elements are missing. So just this week, I was reflecting on where I've seen closed systems and open systems, and I was listening into conversations with my friends and my family. So I had a friend who kept hitting a wall with her healthcare provider when she was trying to get what she needed. I had another friend who was really frustrated because they couldn't find a forum to contribute to a conversation with their municipality. And these are examples of closed systems that we see. They're barriers to entry and challenges to access the franchise, whatever the franchise might be. So we know what it feels like when an institution or a business is unresponsive to the communities and people they serve. And holding this idea in our head can help us see the adverse of that, an open system. An open system, on the other hand, designs alongside its community. This co-creation happens through encouraging the voices of families and communities with democratic inclusion, responsiveness, and reciprocity. This resonates with Possip, as you know, because our contribution is to provide a way for schools and districts to routinely elevate voices. We want to help include people in decision-making and develop systems that are responsive and adaptive. So today we're offering this conversation between Landon and Shani so that all of us can feel in touch with the principles for openness and bring that to our work with families and communities. We know that this will strengthen schools and teams. And right before we launch into that conversation, I'm going to just share the 6 principles of open systems so that you can see them. They'll come up in the conversation. So we have activating open leadership, knowing your community, designing breakthrough spaces and opportunities, modeling creative democracy, assembling abundance partnerships. This is one of my favorite, and expanding openness. So I should mention that a lot of the language I've used to describe open systems, this is all me paraphrasing Landon's work and website. So I want to bring it to Landon himself and go ahead and kick off and pass the mic to Shani and Landon. So I should mention a little bit of Landon's credentials here as well. Landon is the author of Open System, which we'll see and talk about more today. He is the Vice President for Community Partnerships at the Colorado Education Initiative and a former Executive Director of Family Empowerment at Denver Public Schools, among many other things. So Landon and Shani, happy to pass the mic over to you.
Well, I am. Thank you so much, Caitlin, for that awesome introduction. And I imagine for Landon, it's a bit of a surreal experience to hear your concepts and ideas kind of living out in the world. And I know as a former teacher yourself and a former, educator, the idea that kind of what you're putting out there is getting picked up and living on is hopefully super exciting. So let's just dive in. And Landon and I luckily know each other from back in the past work when we both worked together with districts. I was in Nashville, Landon was in New Mexico and then Colorado. So talk to us about what experience got you passionate about even what this idea of open systems. Yeah. What got you passionate about it?
Well, thank you, Shani. And I just want to say I'm just truly honored to be here. Thank you to Possip, because I just think about all the opening that you get to do around the country every single day because of the dialogue that everyone here is committed to having with parents and families, and the possibilities that leads into for our country is just enormous. And I want to talk about that, and I can't wait to get to that. But thank you, because you were a part of our first Openers and Residents program. You helped co-create many of these ideas, and so we wouldn't be here without you and your leadership at Possip. And I just got to say, Caitlin, man, what a ray of sunshine. Man, truly like a great way to be honored with her energy and enthusiasm. It really began for me when I was teaching first grade on the Navajo Nation, where the community around me was literally across a dirt road. And the conversation at the school kept being all the reasons why parents shouldn't be involved or didn't want to be involved or couldn't be involved. One of my fellow teachers there, actually, who eventually I ended up marrying, had this big idea for having a big community night. And that night showed a couple hundred parents where no one said anyone would show up. And that began for me trying to wonder what's going on where we have schools that we often talk about as community institutions, but yet actually feel like they're divorced from the communities they serve. I kind of began a journey then to kind of go deeper into all the different things that we're talking about there: community partnership, family engagement, trust, community building, collective impact, and began a journey to understand all these different mechanisms and structures. Went off to grad school to learn more about it. Came back to Denver, where I grew up. Worked in the Denver Public Schools Office of Family Engagement at the intersection of school design and family and community partnership, and really struggled with this term family engagement. Because I felt that it, on one hand, was not a big enough term for all of the things that we were talking about when we were talking about bringing parents in to co-design our school performance system, or when we were talking about reimagining school with parents or doing community-driven turnaround. The term family engagement just didn't seem big enough for what we were doing there. And then it also wasn't sharp enough. If we lined up 100 people and said, what's family engagement, we'd probably get 100 different answers. And so that began a journey for me to go deeper into organizational design questions and kind of understanding that we were all facing what Caitlin talked about, which is legacy closed systems that are structurally built to not be responsive to the communities they serve, even when they try. because of the design and structures embedded within them. And there we have a lot of examples of amazing schools and systems that in this pandemic broke through that closed structure. And we saw leaders, communities coming together to think differently about this work. And as kind of my last point would be to say, and this is fundamentally connected to democracy building, and then we have to see the work of families being involved in schools as core to our democracy.
It's interesting. I always say at some time I want to look at Possip response rates in certain communities and layer on voting rates as well.
Right.
But I'm curious. So you kind of hinted at schools and districts during the pandemic who you saw really lean into opening up with their community. What did that look like? What are some examples of that you saw?
Man, I saw schools meeting one-on-one with every single student and every single parent and saying, what are your hopes and dreams? How do we work together? How do we think about your career trajectory? I saw schools and systems come together to imagine what the economic future of a community would be. I do a lot of work in rural Colorado, and there were some really inspiring examples of communities banding together to say, what does it mean for us to all work together in this moment and not just fly apart in a million different directions? There's also been some really inspiring work done in places like Chicago, places like Georgia and Kentucky, where big questions about education, whether it's accountability, how we imagine it, have been reimagined through an open systems lens with a co-creation, co-production idea. How do we bring new stakeholders, current stakeholders, and all people to the table to reimagine what's possible?
That's so interesting. And I want to kind of articulate back something that was a new idea and insight for me, which was the idea of opening also to others in your community. When you talk about the rural districts coming together, it makes me think of a city like Nashville that is, Nashville is one part of like a larger metropolitan area, and just the opportunities that we would have if we truly, boundaries are a little bit arbitrary in terms of like your kid goes in this district, your kid's in that district. But what if we were even in this community able to kind of, draw a larger circle and come together more and say, what do we all collectively want for this area? So that's really interesting. So one of the challenges, during the pandemic, but just kind of now in this time, especially with social media, is people already get so many inputs,
right?
Whether asked for or not, especially
too much.
Yeah, and in schools districts. I guess one is like kind of what meaning do you make of that, and how do you kind of help suggest people make meaning of, or even have the capacity to deal with all that comes at them, both asked for and not asked for?
Man, Shani, I think this is such an important question for our day and age. We're just bombarded with information. And I think sometimes the default response then to that bombardment is just to tune it all out. Yet I think we have to prune and be careful with what we tune out and what we tune into. I think what's so powerful about Possip and the work that you're doing is you're trying to send clear signals to educators, leaders, and system leaders what actually parents are thinking about and feeling about a particular issue. And we need leaders who really embody the idea that they don't know everything, that maybe the group of people that they ask for advice all the time should be a wider circle, to your point earlier, and that they might have a sense of the path, but they're not sure of the path. And a part of our work as leaders is to embody a democratic spirit, which allows us to hold the potential for our community to move, improve, and thrive in new ways, which means we have to be tuned into information, but I think we have to be careful about it. The reality is that I think in 10, 15 years, maybe even sooner, we're going to have a lot of litigation in this country about social media and the thing that it has done to our kids and us, because, I think it'll be like junk food and smoking. I think that we're going to have a big conversation about more information isn't necessarily great. Like more food doesn't always mean that's good too. And we have to be thoughtful about the kind of way we cultivate that and carefully consider it for our life. Oh, you're on mute.
I love that. Jasmine put in the chat, we have to prune and, what you said, and be careful with what we tune out and into. And I think it's so important because you're right. It's like we spend a lot of times we exhaust our emotional energy on outliers or things that may not even be true. And so then we don't actually have the energy to consume like what really matters. And so to your point, like through Possip, sometimes you'll see the noise in the media about something. And then you'll see what parents are talking about. And it is so far removed from that thing that we're spending all of our time
totally wide
kind of worried about. And so I guess it's like a helpful kind of reminder of the times when we're actually like just maybe on a kind of hamster wheel running in place with our kind of emotional stress that comes from, in some ways, again, and we see this a lot of times because of all of the constant bombardment, you kind of close off because you're kind of protecting yourself. It's like, I can't handle all of this. And the reality is, the challenge is, though, the people who aren't even attacking you, you don't get to hear from them. And the people who are really happy with you, you don't get to hear from them. So that's super interesting. So you've got, in the open systems, you've got, I think, is it seven principles? How did you kind of come up with those different principles? And I'd love to have you, let's start with kind of, how did you come up with those 7 principles?
Well, we really believed from the very beginning that it would be crazy to talk about co-creation and not co-create the work. So we actually had a convening back in 2019 with a lot of people from around the country. And one of the things we also wanted to do was to create a space where folks that did family engagement, equity work, school leaders, community organizers, democracy experts, people that across a wide range of backgrounds could come together and have this conversation. Because in my experience, typically we get superintendents in a room, we get family engagement people in a room, and then we don't actually build a shared discipline. And that's really what the open system concept is about, is what does it mean to build a shared discipline for how we all talk about this? Because language is critical. To your point, Shani, if we start to use shared language, it allows us to understand each other with a sharpness and a clarity that will be able to have the community organizer and the superintendent and the family engagement director sit across the table from each other and know that we're all moving in the same direction if we could get there. The inability to build shared language is really challenging in our education system, in our communities, in our democracy. So we began in 2019, the pandemic happened, we had another event in 2020 to keep refining and working through the concepts. And then we launched the Opener in Residence program, which you were a part of, where we really kept putting the concepts back in front of people. For example, people said in that program, like, open leadership is the precondition. If leaders aren't willing to open their hearts, minds, and possibilities to their community for the democratic potential that's possible in community, then you can't really build an open system. And that's really what it begins with. So that feedback really informed how we designed and built out a lot of the content. And then from there, we imagine this is a beginning, not an end, to more co-creation. I can imagine all the things that I would learn from Dr. Davis or Najah Callander or Scott, your other panelists, and all the other folks who are in this room, all the different innovations and explorations they're doing in this space. That's, to me, the power of building that shared discipline and work.
Yeah, just remind me. Yeah, we're super fortunate. I mean, we get to see like everything that parents and staff and students what they share, and sometimes it's feedback for us, and we get to take that in. We always say, whenever people ask about new things we do, every good idea we've had is from our customers, and so we're really, fortunate to have the ability to have that. It's interesting. Another opener in residence who's done some work with Possip, she took part of what her observation was helping schools internalize that feedback. And so Dr. Swore is going to be talking in one of our sessions about
that's awesome.
She created a framework and a protocol to sit down with the individual school and how they can kind of take their, but also what was really interesting about that, and she'll talk about this, is they brought in families, teachers, staff, and principals all sat together and went through their feedback together on what that process was like as well. So it's really, really interesting. So do you have a favorite principle of the 7?
This is a really what a great question. I think Donnie would say that my favorite is the abundance partnersps.
Okay, well, that was Caitlin's too. So yeah, tell us
more
about what that.
I love that. I can't wait to hear more.
Well, the principles are really, and again, seeing them in the way that you design them too, it's beautiful. And just, again, it's so special. The first 2 are really about preparing your leadership and understanding your community. The second 2 are about provoking and like creating open moments inside the system, creating breakthrough change and modeling creative democracy. And again, that we have to see ourselves as educators, as folks in this space, as democracy builders. And that's critical. Because if we see ourselves as a democracy builder, I think we just ask different questions. And so then if you have this breakthrough moment and you model creative democracy, then you have to assemble partnerships that reject the dominant scarcity dynamic that exists in our society and wires for abundance. Right now, I'm spending a lot of time across rural Colorado bringing large groups of districts together to begin to share resources, and for kids in rural communities to not be limited just to the choices inside of their community. So a school district in Durango can send a kid to a neighboring district to learn about culinary or entrepreneurship. And that wiring of systems and structures, institutions for abundance to then sustain open system progress, to me, I think is it is hard, challenging work, but it is so necessary for where we go in the future of our society.
It's interesting. I love that example again in Colorado. I'm an proud HBCU grad at Howard, and so I also swam at Howard. And Howard swim team it's the only HBCU swim team in the country, and so it's become very dominant. But I also noticed the other thing that I was seeing, like North Carolina A&T as an example, they have a very strong track team, and so the kind of same idea is like, okay, so HBCUs are institutions that have been historically underfunded, limited resources, but to the Abundance Partnership, what if, HBCUs come together and say, hey, we're going to like focus on like, we can't have a swim team at every HBCU, but let's just start with, having the top one at Howard. Let's have North Carolina A&T is going to have a top track team. And so I think that same idea, and also coming out of the pandemic, I think we saw opportunities where not every rural community maybe can offer like Calc 2, but if you can figure out ways to come together so that all students can get access to it, I think that the Abundance Partnership idea is super important. So one of the important part about co-creation is that people participate. And so one of the top questions our customers ask us, especially because I would say we're still a relatively young company, and I don't think we realized that what we were doing was, kind of changing. There was so much change management to it. But I say all that to say, so many of our customers are people who are just like very mission driven. They're doing Possip because it's the right thing to do. And so they really want to hear from their families. And so one of the top questions is, how do I get my response rates up? How do I get our engagement up? So when you're trying to co-create and be in partnership and people aren't kind of engaging back at the rate you want them to, how do you think about that?
I think that this is an issue I hear all over the country. It's so funny. I feel like we either hear this or they're too engaged, which is really interesting. So like, how do we create a vehicle that allows for everyone to come together to kind of ignite the spark in a school? And I think that fundamentally, that's the core question of, what do we want our kids to achieve at this school? What do we want to get done here? What is the thing we can all build? We've helped communities do some really powerful work around co-creation, around graduate profiles, learner profiles, and talk about building shared language. It allows for more shared language between parents and educators and leaders about what's possible. And if you really bring all different stakeholders together and create that breakthrough moment, then your engagement on the other side, we've seen consistently increases, because it's hard to just get started with talking without there isn't something to talk about that feels very core to what we're all here about, which is your child. How do we work together for their benefit? And what does it mean for us to know that it's working?
What you just said had me thinking differently about something that I think is very common in a lot of districts. And I think the first kind of 1.0 of it was really good, which is parent universities. Like, so there are these different versions of parent universities. A lot of districts do them as like a day-long activity. But as I even think about that, and I kind of use what you're saying to reframe my thinking, those are typically designed about thinking, what do we want parents to know? Let's like push up all of these things and these resources to parents. And so what if even districts are to like change a portion of that, which is like, what do we really want to hear from parents? How do we kind of co-create together? Like, let's set our vision for the next school year together with parents and families. Let's set our vision for the next 5 years. So I think that's really as you were talking, it gave me a very tactical idea for something I might start to think about, even in just my mindset and my framing for something that I think is like a very great idea, which is parent universities, or people call it something different.
Right. Quick on that just for a second, is just like, we can't underestimate how challenging it is to shift that orientation to listening versus telling. It's so hard. I know that's a core part of why I think Possip is such an incredible organization, and you guys are building so much openness. I was just with a school, and we had this focus group with educators, and I said, what do you need? How can you learn how can you listen to your parents? And consistently, and then I redirected again, and then I redirected again. People said, well, we got to tell them this. We got to tell them about this. We got to tell them about this. And this is back to, if I had a second favorite principle, the open leadership principle. How do we have leaders that can truly listen with their hearts and be open in their hearts to the possibilities of all the things our parents and families want?
I think that, I mean, I was naive. And so I was kind of like, oh yeah, of course. Like people want to hear from folks and, but I think you're right. And I think if we can tell ourselves as leaders and remind ourselves that it is actually hard work, then I think it helps equip us because it feels like it should be easy. It's like we've got, 2 ears, we've got a mouth, we can listen, we can talk, but it is actually, it's really, really hard.
It's tough.
So we're going to finish up this conversation in about 3 minutes. So I wanted to make sure in the chat that if you have a question, a burning question that you have for Dr. Mascareñaz, that you can feel free to put it in the chat. I'm going to ask him one more question while we kind of give folks the opportunity. Thinking about how do you help people develop? I mean, the hardest part is mindset. Do you have thoughts on how you help at multiple levels for, across an organization? How do you help people develop that mindset?
It's a critical question. This is why I think thinking about leadership is so important, and about the ability to say, are you open in yourself for the possibilities? And it's one of the reasons why we've chosen kind of the connotation of open. There's a lot of very technical terms out there for what we're all talking about, but open carries deep schema for people in their lives. Children understand open. We understand open translates across languages really well. And I think that that's one of the reasons why we've moved to this language, to allow kind of a deeper conversation about our personal blocks. And this is critical back to this leadership question for democracy, Shani. Like, if schools are the forge of our democracy, and where most of our parents and families encounter democracy for the very first time, and it's a place where their voice doesn't matter or gets diluted and the structures don't respond to it, then no wonder we are seeing such challenges across our society and democracy. And so we have to talk about that from a mindset perspective, about openness in yourself, in your organization, in your community, and the implications of a closed model have, not only just for your classroom, but beyond.
Yeah. And it's so interesting. I mean, I think in this hyper partisan time, I think what we see is actually there's I think what you hear is a shared sense of people feeling voiceless, no matter what their beliefs are, or what they're trying to advocate for. I think a lot of the tension that we hear, and again, it is like, to your point about social media earlier, it is like so much and yet so little all at once. And so I think that's part of what people feel.
Yeah.
I'm going to actually close out with one question, and I think it's connected to what Najah put in the chat, which is that for us, what we had to lean into are behaviors that build trust. And so I talked about Dr. Spoor, who's going to talk a little bit about her framework, and that emerged also. It's just like, how do you build trust? It's so important. So the last question I want to leave you with before we leave you and transition to our great panelists. What thoughts do you have on how to build trust?
Well, trust is everything. And if you look around the country, if you look around the world at healthcare systems, at social service systems, education systems, the ones that have trust in the communities they serve are the ones that are the most effective. And the reality is that, and we talk about this quite a bit in the book, that the power of co-creation is to reignite the possibility of participation, which means that people can trust the thing because they helped build it. And that's everything. A closed system is something that we've inherited, that was not built by us, that was built by not the patterns of community, race, and power that exist in our communities. And so that has to be a constant dynamic in our communities. And if we do that and we commit to it, and I've seen it happen in schools and districts all over this country, you can reignite the passion for trust, the possibility for trust, which will lead to a fundamentally different conversation with the community and the system.
Well, that was beautiful. So powerful. So well said. Landon, before you say bye-bye, and Landon's going to go, good luck taking that to the community college board.
Yes, thank you for that. Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, I'll try to bring
how can people buy the book? When's it coming out? I know you've sent the final off. So when's the book coming out?
The book's coming out in June, but it's available for pre-order, and I think we can probably get a code for any Possip person. So.
Oh yes, well we will do that. Awesome, yay!
That's awesome.
Well, thank you so much. So now we're going to take all these principles and apply them to our panel of folks who are Florida, Tennessee, Houston, and then all of the folks who are in the chat. You're a huge part of this conversation. So thank you so much, Landon.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Hopefully this is a great way for you to both kind of like submit your final draft of the book and then start to get it out into the world. So
it's perfect. Thank you all so much for all that you do every day for communities. And I wish I could stay, but I will carry your passion.
Please do.
Thank you so much, Landon. All right, I'm gonna just for a moment share my screen just so that we can highlight our panelists. Very, very excited to give a big welcome to our three panelists, and Shani will continue on the conversation as well. So we've got Najah Callander, the Executive Director of Family and Community Engagement at Houston ISD. Whoop, whoop. We've got some Texans in the crowd, so big fans there. We've got Dr. Pamela Davis, our Director of Equity and Student and Family Services at KIPP, Jacksonville, Florida. So happy to have you here, Dr. Davis. And our old friend, Scott Langford, who is Chief Academic Officer of Sumner County Schools here in Tennessee, one of our neighboring counties. And we're so happy to have you here too, Langford. I didn't wanted to just go casual and call you by your last name, I guess. Scott. So we're going to go ahead and we'll spotlight our panel. I'll stop sharing and we're going to get into a conversation with these leaders and Shani. So I took several notes of things that you all were putting in the chat. I'm going to start with just a broad general question to whomever, asking, hearing from Dr. Mascareñaz, what about the conversation really resonated with you or stood with you? Maybe I'll start with Najah, actually, because Shani even also commented on something that was resonating.
That was fantastic. I'm not sure what I was expecting, but I went and read Landon's work through the website, and I just thought this is something I have to share with my team because this puts some language to work that we have been trying to do for the last year. And Caitlin and Shani, you guys have gotten to see us as we muddle through close up. I think one of the first things I thought is, where are we on this journey? And we ebb and flow between, preparing and provoking. We're really super grateful for the tool that is Possip, because Possip was one of the first ways that we could point to how we are trying to open our system. It really was for us on the ground floor a way that we were going to get that regular trust building dialogue with our families. For us, the beginning of this process really was set by our superintendent when he said, the first pillar of the strategic plan is to build trust and reliability with our families and our community. And it was like, oh, okay, we got to get on this. And so I'm really grateful for Landon's work and for you all's support from the Possip team, because I know that the way that I approached it is a little bit different than how you guys had operated in the past. But it was a good opportunity to allow us to move along this continuum without scaring everybody away from what we were doing. So thank you.
Yes, Najah, I really loved what you were saying about, what behaviors build trust. Are there any other behaviors that really come to mind that you lean into?
Well, yeah, not only did we have to listen, but then we had to communicate about what we heard and how we were going to act on it. And then we actually had to do it. So that cycle of listening, reflecting back what we learned, acting on what we learned, and then telling them what the result of that was, so that people start to see you show up consistently with reliability, where you can stand in any room in our 273 schools and say, I know about this community because you told me, and what I'm doing here is informed by you. And if you don't like it, or if it doesn't work, then we can reiterate that, and being comfortable with that, which I think that's the big thing that I've experienced. And my team a lot of my teammates are on the call today, so they can strangle me afterwards. But I think that's part of our fear in the education system, is we feel like we can't reiterate, and go through that cycle, even though that's what we want kids to do. So, but it doesn't always feel safe to do that. And so I think all of us going on that journey together has been really important.
And I think that cycle, one thing that really, you know, was inspiring that Landon said was when he was talking about these breakthrough moments. But I guess what I kept reflecting on is like, you don't just get to a breakthrough moment without all of those feedback loops and that cycle and that trust. Like it is many breakout moments before there's a breakthrough moment. So I love that you're describing that cycle to us. Thank you. I'm going to shift to asking the same question to Dr. Davis. I have something that you put in the chat that I may ask about. Well, first I'll say, you know, what resonated with you, what stood out, and then I'll ping you on the specific.
Sounds good. Thanks, Caitlin. So it's one of those things where you say misery loves company. It was really great for him to hit on some of the same pain points that I've had across the 3 different school communities that I've been a part of. One of the things he said specifically was when our families feel like they're divorced from the school community. And the way I've entertained that or said that in the past has been sometimes our families, our parents have not had positive school experiences. And so when we're sending the survey or when we're inviting them to campuses, we are inviting them to a space where they haven't had positive experiences, and we have to be more creative and thoughtful and intentional about what that looks like. And so probably the second closest thing that resonated was we've sent surveys or we've asked for input, and there are crickets. We haven't gotten the feedback. And so just reevaluating the platforms that our parents are on, creating that culture of trust, like Najah mentioned, in terms of, okay, you asked me and I haven't gotten the feedback about, you know, what you've implemented. So being intentional about, okay, I'm asking you and I'm being very upfront and transparent about the results. When it's favorable in terms of what's been asked, as well as perhaps going the extra mile and explaining if it's something that is pending or has not been acted on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really stood out to me when he said that schools could be the first place that some people have encountered democracy. Yeah. I was like, whoa, that's so true. That's intense, though, and a huge responsibility. One of the things before I moved to Scott, you put in the chat, you quoted wiring systems to sustain them. Why did that matter to you? What stood out?
So I just think about over time how we build a community that is comfortable with not only coming to our campus, but responding and being hands-on involved, whether that's answering a survey or whether that's coming to an event, participating on a committee. And so those systems are wired in a way that our community feels like they can trust us, that we are actually doing what we say we're the experts at doing. And so I feel like by doing so, that yes, it will sustain. Families will continue to send their second and third child to us. They'll talk about us in the coffee shop. They'll talk about us at church and local events where we continue to be a space that our community can trust and rely on.
And a space where they matter and get to participate in the democratic process. Yeah.
Yes.
Dr. Scott would love to hear from you next. What really resonated with you?
Yeah, in a way, I think it kind of mirrored our journey with Possip, because I think we started, you know, when COVID hit in 2020 and we were closed, we immediately began with Possip because we didn't have a structure to be able to reach in and communicate with all of our parents. And I thought what was amazing is that I think for education, for most of my lifetime, we've accepted certain myths that COVID exposed is not really true. So I think there was a myth that economically disadvantaged families, English language learner families, weren't staked in their children's education. They just trusted the school or let school happen to them. What we found with Possip, you know, was immediately we had overwhelming response from, you know, economically disadvantaged families, English language learner families. It was really amazing, and it helped dismiss that myth that those families were disengaged from education. It just opened our eyes to the fact that we've got to do a much better job of reaching out and listening. And I think that really resonated well. The other myth that I think that gets broken down is I think he hit really strongly is that when you move to a more democratic model, you have to accept that on the initial, and I think Shani got this too, is we're not really good at this. We have to practice and we have to accept some failures. And I think the biggest thing where a Possip helps is, you know, right now, a lot of civil discourse in our society is governed by the same 10 to 15 people that shout loudest on Facebook. And when you can bring hard data to your stakeholders and community and show 93% of our community appreciates what we're doing. Here's some specific feedback of areas where we need to improve. Here are some things we're hearing at the district level and at school level that we need to address. But a lot of this stuff is just noise in the background of social media performative nonsense. And we have to be able to dismiss that while hearing the true feedback.
Yeah, I wouldn't, oh, sorry, I have
Please,
two
Shani.
things to offer. One is also, Scott, to your point, we also saw interesting in one of our earliest partners, and that it was a school that had been kind of in the bottom 5% of the state for a while. And so they were in turnaround mode. And so one of the things they first commented on through their Possip is parents were saying things like, they had a new principal, they're like, we can see the differences. Here's the changes in curriculum. And so the principal said, oh, our teachers didn't even know that parents knew what the curriculum was or were paying attention to the curriculum. And so all of a sudden they kind of, that opened what teachers thought parents were caring about. And then that kind of also gave them bolster some confidence to say, oh, our school we see the improvements. To that point, Najah, if you don't mind, I want to share. I think I remember one of the earlier things y'all were surprised at was how many parents actually were happy and had positive things to say. And to your point, Scott, about the silent majority and kind of what's happening, like the N of 10 people who are screaming on Facebook are unhappy versus, you know, what is, if you actually give everyone the opportunity to share where people are, I think it's super intriguing.
Mhm.
Shani,
Yeah.
you know, that was a big aha moment for Houston. And this summer we're doing principal training and unveiling kind of our Possip pilot to principals. And I asked people, what do you think the response has been to the question? And they had us at 40 or 50%, because Twitter will have you thinking that your worst review is who you are. And to be able to say 80% of our families answered yes to that pulse check for the last, 3 months, it was shocking for them. And I think it allowed us, when we think about opening our system, it allowed us to begin a dialogue that hearing feedback might not be so bad.
Najah, that goes right along with something that Marissa Rodriguez has put in the chat, and just want to call out again, if folks have questions for our panelists, you can put them in the chat. But Marissa just said, what I'm hearing so far from the panelists is encouragement to get comfortable with tense moments when opening up with discussions between parties. And then she gave some inspiration for folks in the audience. And so that's just a question, to remaining open. I would be curious, you've spoken to it, some of you a little bit, but in this time, how do you encourage yourself and your teams to stay and remain open? Does someone want to take that first? Maybe Dr. Davis, our Director of Equity too. So would love to really hear what you've got to say on it.
Yeah, so I have a unique seat because, yes, I am wearing my hat of engaging the families and the students in our community, but also equity, which causes us to pause and ensure that we're considering that all stakeholders are at the table. And so I think in terms of engaging, let me make sure I get the question right. Tell me again.
How do you encourage yourself and your team to stay open?
So it's painful when you are putting in practices and programs and you think you've gotten it right, and then you receive that feedback that kind of says, you didn't consider this, or, oh, wow, they didn't want that after all. And so it's just coming through the table, combing through it, asking those critical questions about, okay, so what grade level was this? Did we not consider that when we were coming up with the programming? All right, well, what will help us transition more of our 8th graders to 9th grade? So it's not dismissing the expert actions that we feel like we've taken, completely, but we do have to consider the perspective of the parents who are living it and feeling it every day. To the point I think Scott was mentioning about the curriculum, or Shani was mentioning about the curriculum piece. I think sometimes we discount what our parents know, and it minimizes opportunities for us to involve them more in the process. So whether it's curriculum, whether it is vertical articulation when it comes to what their kids are learning. And again, using these as bonus questions in our Possip surveys are a great way for us to just get insights that we would otherwise assume and not necessarily get right.
Scott, I heard you giving some noises of I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah, what's with you?
Sorry, I went to church there for a minute.
That's good.
But I think for us, it's the first thing you have to do is be committed to receiving the feedback and creating feedback loops. It opened up our eyes to how many different ways we needed to hear feedback. And the number one thing that we received immediately is that we spoke a language most of the time that was inaccessible, not just to parents, but sometimes to other educational professions. And it reflected the silos that we were living in more than it did the work that we were trying to do to benefit kids. So I think starting to hear that feedback and creating feedback loops where we could hear from parents, where we could hear from students, where we could hear from teachers, because we were doing a lot of really powerful things, but we were getting lost in, and I think it's the essence of a closed system. You get kind of close. And I think that's the hardest thing that you have to discipline yourself to when you start to open things up, because there will be feedback that's tough to hear and listen to, and you have to listen to it and then learn like what's appropriate that we should act on and what's noise that we have to just keep plowing through. And that requires a lot of trust and a lot of conversation.
I'm going to ask one final whip around question. I was going
to add something. I think part of what's hard also about educators is educators fortunately are I'll say our nature doers. We want to be in constant motion and action. And even sometimes what we say to customers and partners, they're like, well, what should I do with this? And we're like, sometimes you don't do anything. You sit with it and you see, is this true? You need to take action. And so I think that's part of what's so hard about our kind of disposition as people who are in education to act and take action, is that sometimes that's not the answer. Sometimes the answer is to sit. And I also see that I got the opportunity to be in a conversation with 5 admissions, deans of admissions from top universities. And so someone was introducing a new idea to them, and one of them pushed back on the idea that was being, and the person who was facilitating the conversation, instead of trying to defend what he was saying, he just said, oh, tell me more. Why do you think that? And that's the key. And when I see professionals developing, and when I see people who are really exhibiting leadership versus ones who are kind of like still developing in that space, it's that ability to say, instead of like saying, I need to explain to you why I'm doing this and defend, it's to say, oh, interesting, tell me more. And it's hard to do, but I do think it's a powerful differentiator as people are on their leadership journeys.
And I think like Scott really said it well when he said, like, this is practice. We're practicing. I love anytime I've been in a new situation in life, or a situation that was really nebulous, is scary. Those key phrases, like, tell me more. They're just things you practice and put in your head, and it starts to shape your behavior. That's really cool, Shani. So we're going to just do a final whip around. I wish I could ask you a million more questions. But I just wanted to ask each of you, for the audience's benefit, what are you personally going to take away from today's conversation? What are you going to take to your crew, to your team, and what are you going to keep close? So Najah, I'll start with you, and we'll go through all 4 of you.
Oh boy. Okay. I think Landon talking about school being the place where people experience democracy for the first time is just something that's I'm going to sit with. And ask my team to sit with how we are making sure voices don't feel devalued. That is a space, because it's a longer term goal for us as a district. We have some things in place. We've recently redesigned our parent university. We've got action plans in place, and we've got our family-friendly schools plan in place, all that is really emphasizing the feedback loop. And now I think the next thing that I want to work on is how we co-create. So how do we engage with parents and students and teachers to say, this was our take on opening the system. What's missing? What do you all see? Have you seen a opportunity? Do you see an opportunity for us to honor, our core beliefs more? So I think it's really in those couple of things that we've set up that are very much more open than they were a year ago. Now I think there's an opportunity for us to say, how do we iterate on those? So that's our work plan, Team HISD.
I love it, Najah. The word dignity also really has been staying with me when you talk about democracy and voices not being devalued. Something about that just brings to mind the word dignity. Dr. Davis, what are you going to take back with you and keep close?
So Landon mentioned shared language, and I don't think we can sleep on that. So a lot of times we are not as intentional as we could be about speaking a language. And also even in like the communication that we're sending out, it's a flyer, it's great, it's got the location, date and time, but it does not necessarily say, parents, we need you, and this is the action that we want to take. And so shared language, not just in what we are sending out, but even after we get the parents in front of us, being able to help align with the lingo that we're using into more parent-friendly language, so that parents can truly feel vested. They can feel like they can trust us, and that they'll want to continue to come back as we continue to help kids push towards student achievement.
That's great. Also, Dr. Davis, the work of Brene Brown is out there in the world telling us now that language shapes emotions. So there's a lot to what language shapes in terms of culture and group identity. All right, Mr. Scott Langford, what are you taking home with you? What are you keeping close?
No, I want to go with something that Najah said, reflecting on co-creating. I think one of the things that we see after COVID is that high school students, for instance, there's still a large amount of apathy. We're struggling with attendance, things like that. And I think it's because kids are no longer wired to say, well, I'm going to take Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, because that's what I have to do to go to college. It's a great opportunity for us to start trying to co-create and think through what should high school look like moving forward. We got lots of people that are really bright people that are thinking about it, but it'd be really easy to replicate that in a closed system versus risking getting out there and hearing from parents, hearing from stakeholders, hearing from from our students, and then working together to build a process. Because I think we all know that the high school model is 100 years old and needs to change. But how do we change that in a way that most reflects the needs of our community and our students?
Thank you. That's really great to have that really tangible example of co-creating. So thank you so much for that, Scott. Shani, you're going to close us out. What are you going to keep close?
Well, I think I'll keep two things close. One is just to the idea that Scott was just articulating, just how many opportunities there are and how hard it is. I mean, like Scott said, when you're thinking about co-creating, it's not just co-creating a small thing. It's like, how do we recreate what's been done for 100 years in a certain way? So just the bigness of what it means, especially in education. And I think the idea, to the point about, schools being the first place for democracy, I know we all know this, but just how high stakes the work that we do is, and therefore how important it is that we do it in partnership with others. And then most tactically, I think just the idea that it's practice, because even as much as I think about this stuff, I still sometimes fail with being good at listening first. And so just kind of reminding myself to keep practicing the skill.
Yes, that is a really good one. Great. Well, I just really appreciate all of you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to close this out with just a couple of remarks, and then we'll finish this first session for the day. And so thank you, Landon, who has carded, Najah, Shani, Scott, and Pamela. You're so wonderful, and you just really help people understand and resonate with the experience we all share. We will be publishing a recap of this conversation. We'll have a recording, we'll have blogs. There will be more information to come from all of this goodness. And in the spirit of co-creating, we also want to announce that Possip is really excited to start co-creating even more with our partners. We are beginning a membership. So this is an educator membership for things like having a job board and seeing opportunities, talent within our network. We're also going to be giving a membership directory and opportunities for connections within this membership, as well as curated content and exclusive events. We have 5,000 educators in our network, district administrators, and more from there, over 1,400 schools. We just think there's a lot of power for co-creation, and we want to hold space for that. So we are excited to announce this. This is just a soft announcement, and more information will be coming to you all soon about how to be a part of this membership and take advantage of this community. So don't miss out on the rest of today's sessions. We've got a session coming up at 12:15 on handling hard feedback, and then more later on today. So appreciate all of you. And with that, we'll say goodbye. If you want to touch base with any of these panelists, reach out to us and we'll get you connected. Thank you so much.